So, hello everyone. First of all, I want to thank you, the hosts, and also the sponsors of this event for the kind invitation and the great honor and opportunity to talk to you. I'm sure that you all can't wait to see my slides and to see another PowerPoint presentation carefully prepared. But unfortunately, although this is a tech conference, I managed to mess my presentation up. So due to technical reasons, you will not see my slides, which also forces me to tweak my talk a little bit, which means that I will not talk too much. I'm not able to show you things we're doing, but I thought about it might be interesting for you to see or to hear something about the framework I use called first principle thinking in order to find out what we actually should do as a parliament in terms of digitalization, having in mind that we have only limited time and resources and so on. So, but you will be provided with the slides after the conference. My name is Aleksandar Savanovic. As mentioned, I'm the Chief Digitalization Officer of the Regional Parliament of Baden-Württemberg, which is in the southwest of Germany. And I started this position in September 25, so I'm kind of the rookie in the room. Before that, I was in the startup world, and yeah, I brought some like startup-like thinking to this new position. And before I start talking about this way of thinking in terms of first principle thinking, I would like to make a very personal remark and to share it with you. It has something to do with the discussions we had yesterday, and also with the international character of our conference here. As you see from my name, or you might know, Savanovic is not really a German surname. This comes because my parents were guest workers from Yugoslavia who came to Germany in the 60s and 70s to work there, and I grown up in Germany then as a German citizen. For the younger in the audience, Yugoslavia was a state in the southeast of Europe. Many people lived there, composed of 6 nations. They shared a common language, common culture, common food, humor, and so on. And a great soccer team called the Brazilians of Europe because they preferred short passes and good dribblings. And even the national stadium was called Maracanã. And the state was not perfect, but it had its institutions and they worked until the 80s, late 80s. But then the state started actually to collapse due to economic crisis and due to the fact that the politicians were not able and the institutions were not able to deal with this economic crisis. They opted for raising nationalistic tensions between the ethnics. And all this erupted in the beginning of the 90s in a very bloody civil war in Yugoslavia, and so that this state doesn't exist anymore. And if this sounds familiar to you, like this economic crisis and polarization, then maybe you will also recall our yesterday's discussion, where we said, well, our subnational parliaments in particular are kind of reflections of those polarizations, because we talk about these polarizations in these parliaments. And what gives me hope is the fact that in all this chaos and in all this bloodshed that happened in Yugoslavia, the state institutions that actually tried to prevent the war from happening were the subnational parliaments, in particular 2 of them, Bosnia and Macedonia. They were the places that provided at least the stage to talk about alternative solutions than war. So when we talk today about enhancing, and yesterday about enhancing our subnational parliaments with technology, we're serving really a good course, actually a big course, because we are producing an instrument which can not only improve society but also prevent bad things from happening. And against this background, I want to talk about this concept of first principle thinking and understanding what is maybe actually a current crisis for democracies where we could maybe help solve it with technology. So for that, I will provide you just with some basic figures about my state. As mentioned, it's called Baden-Württemberg. Don't try to spell it. The name regularly appears in German quiz shows as a question because it's very hard to remember how it's spelled correctly. So I will just refer it to BW. BW has 11.5 million citizens, represented by 157 members of parliament. We are a very rich region in Germany, because due to our auto industry, also due to our chemistry industry, and this adds up to a GDP of 640 billion euro per year. So you could think that everything is going well and everything is going all right. But there's another figure which states that per woman we only have 1.39 children. So this, you can of course do sophisticated surveys about the current state of your country or current state of your democracy, but the low birth rate actually indicates for me, and I think for a lot of others, that people don't trust in the future of democracy, don't trust in the future of the place where they live. And that's why they're reluctant to have babies. And if you think about it, well, how could you measure it? How could you get an indication whether this conclusion is right, that they don't believe in a better future of democracy? You would only have to ask the politicians. You know, because as some kind of basic theme, you can see that, like, if you do maybe a little bit oversimplified, but only a little bit, assessment of how they judge their own work, you know, you would get a kind of, roughly said, leftist answer who says, well, the state would have to do more, like more regulation for more outcome. And the right would say, oh no, that's not a good idea, the state is not so good in doing that, so let's do less regulation with less outcome, and let the society deal with itself. So we have, on the one side, we have this option of doing more with more, and on the other side, we have the option of doing less with less. And somehow we're like bouncing between these two polars and getting more and more polarized. But actually, when you think, well, is there maybe a point or maybe a way to do more with less? Then you almost automatically get to the approach of technically trying to find a solution, because some kind of definition of technology is actually doing more with less. And in terms of parliamentary work, this means actually finding a way of closing the feedback loop between the legislator and the society. Because my take on that is that actually society accelerates in a much higher speed than it did in the past. And that is why our citizens have the impression that our politicians are not able to deal with the current exponential threats, because they have only linear means to answer to them. And so our job, I think, is at the parliaments to find ways to provide the politicians with technical means to answer to these exponential challenges with exponential solutions. And I will give you just a brief take on 3 levels I conduct with this way of thinking called first principle thinking, where you kind of ask very naive questions and then start from scratch thinking about these topics. The 3 levels I would like to talk about is strategy, and then the legislative side of the parliament and the administration side of the parliament. First, maybe with strategy. We've heard a lot about what to do, what is necessary to do. I would like to emphasize another side we haven't talked about so far, and this is actually what's not to do. Because at least in Germany or in my state, we are also doing a lot of things in terms of digitalization which are, let's put it politely, not very efficient, which will bring us nowhere, you know, but they cost money, they cost you nerves, and what is the most important part, they cost attention, consciousness. And this is the most limited resource we have, decision makers in particular. So finding a framework to say no, to stop even ongoing projects which consume too much attention and promise too little progress. This is one of the first things I think you should do, and actually that's a little bit weird that we don't talk about it enough, because it's actually, I think, the easier task to find, like, to put it in plain language, what is the BS project you are currently doing? You know, maybe you're familiar with this concept of BS jobs, you know, where people say, well, I don't really have a task, I'm just pretending to work. And I think there are some projects where we exactly do the same thing. And everybody actually knows it, but no one is willing to admit it. So one in my position who's like responsible for the strategy, I have to be, to some extent, the bad guy who says, well, if I come to the conclusion that we need to provide technical solutions to close the feedback loop for the politicians, and we are doing a digitalization project which brings us nowhere nearer to this goal, then I have to say that we have to stop and that we have to kill this project. So this is on the strategy level, which is maybe a quite straightforward thing, but in practice, every one of you who works in the administration knows that it's very hard to start a project, but then it can be also very hard to stop it. But I can only encourage the effort to do it, because it provides you time, it provides you with resources to focus on the more important things which promise leverage gain instead of just marginal gains. Then on the second level, I would like to talk about what we can actually do on the legislative side. Here I think is the biggest chance to really make a difference. Because if you look at the parliament and you compare it to other public authorities, like, what is the difference? You know, we also have budgeting issues, we have an HR department, we have legal people there and so on. But what makes the difference to other public authorities is actually the legislative work. So there seems to be the leverage. There we can make a change. And then I thought one thing very striking to me when I started working for the public administration is that the key feature of it is routines. To be in routines. Like, if you get a new task, you have to define roles, you have to define norms, and then this together becomes a routine, and people love this routine. And this is a good thing. You know, you want to have an administration which is operating based on routines. But this, to some strange circumstances, also leads to that you're kind of reluctant to formulate ambitious goals. And this can be very, very limiting if you only aim for like a 10% increase in productivity. Because in the startup world, you make the experience that it is equally hard to improve 10% or to improve 110%. You know, if you start thinking of, okay, how can we do it really in an efficient way? What parts of the process can we kill? What parts of the process can be solved with technology? You know, it's a strange experience, but the higher you put your ambition, the bigger is the gain, and then you get a good input to output ratio in terms of how much effort do you put in. And so this was my experience, going into teams composed of public servants and formulating an ambitious goal. And for us in the legislative side, ambitious goal would actually be some things were actually mentioned in this conference, like an ontology for the legislature. To have a real world, a representation of the real world in our data sets, which would open up opportunities to have a constant evaluation of the work of our legislators. But when you say that, there come a lot of contra arguments, which try, of course, to melt down the ambition goal. They will say that it is unrealistic and it's not worth it because it's too tough. And then I think again, some of our task is to keep the spirits high and to formulate these ambitious goals. Because if we don't formulate it in the first place, we will end up at some lower point although we had actually the potential to reach higher and better results. I think one example for that we can find again in the executive branch. I mentioned it this morning also in the panel discussion. If you look, for example, at the stock price of the Palantir Corporation, it was very low for a very long time because nobody believed them. You know, nobody believed them that you can actually make a business out of unstructured data in the executive branch. And then if you look at the stock price right now, then maybe you would regret that you haven't invested in it, but you also can make some conclusions out of it. You know, they had the advantage that they were outside of the administration. They were able to formulate a very ambitious goal, and then they had the stamina to stick to it. And a little bit also to converge with the public administration, with the concept of forward deployed engineers, and heavily relying on this concept of ontology. So my point here is, although I know that this company is very controversial in public discourse, that maybe we are looking for some kind of Palantir moment in the legislative point, and therefore it's very important to have this ability to formulate ambitious goals. On the third level, the level of administration, I would like to say that here I have a little bit of a different take compared to the legislative side. When it comes to the administration, what I have realized there is also a very strange thing compared to startups. When you work in a startup, you have this concept of extreme ownership, which means every task is owned by the guy or the girl who's responsible for it to an extreme extent, so that everything which could go wrong is allocated to this person. Just because of the size, you know, there's no other to blame. There's no procedure to blame. There's no excuse for failure. You know, it's just you. You know, you just fall back to your own abilities and capabilities, and maybe also shortcomings. And on the other side, you have the public administration. But things a little bit different. Like ownership is diffused in the organization. We have all these organigrams and process descriptions and everything. But then when you ask a very simple question, if something is not going well and you ask them who screwed it up, it's very hard to get a name. And not in terms of only blaming, but also in terms of feeling the ownership for a project. This becomes a very big problem. Because without this ownership, you can get very bad results in the course of the project, but also different compositions of teams, which means that you start with a certain composition of your team at the beginning of the project, and then due to its duration, people who don't feel any ownership for the project, they have no problem with leaving the project. They send any person from their department who can replace them, but actually this replacement never works 100%. You have to some extent to start again and to repeat all the things you already have agreed on. And so a project can get very the feeling of bubble gum, where it becomes a never-ending story. And the mean to end this is actually this ownership concept. And so when we combine this with the technology or the AI application to the parliament, what does it mean? Because I think to some extent AI has inherent the risk of further diffusing ownership for your results. I think William mentioned it with this idea of disclaimers in legislative outcomes, that if you put the AI on it, then somehow the responsibility of the drafter actually starts to fade. So how can you change this? Our take on this is in terms of AI, that we want to enable our people to build not their own agents, but in particular their own skills for their agents. So maybe you're already familiar with this, that Anthropic, Claude, has this new innovation which is called Skills, which is a very low-hanging fruit where you can just in natural language describe processes and let the agent actually understand what you are doing with natural language. You have also the ability to include data like reference files or templates for your corporate identity or whatever. And so it's a very easy thing to do for a non-technical person. And then you get you immediately become the author of a skill. You know, you provided the agent with a skill, and you are the author. You are the owner of the skill. And through this ownership of the skill, you also own the results. So this is something where we don't push, like we don't go into the departments and tell them, well, you have to make this skill and this skill and this skill, but we only provide them with the tools. And say, well, here are the tools. You know what are the procedures in your department. We can teach you maybe how to create skills, but even there you have Anthropic, who's actually building skill creators, so agents or skills which help you to build skills, so that there's not much effort needed actually from our side. But what is needed is like this hint to say, here are the tools, and if you're willing, you can just pick it up and build your own skill. And then the result is that the energy comes to you, like the energy comes to the project. So this is unrealistic to expect, like in a public administration, in our case of approximately 200 staff members, that everyone will start building skills. This is unrealistic, but it's not necessary. You know, you only need a few people. In a best case, you have one person at least per department who's willing to do so. And with the incredible leverage that agents provide, this brings you very far. So on the administration side, to conclude this approach of providing tools and the chance to get ownership of the tools you create with those tools, of the skills you create with those tools, this would be the approach I would like a copy from the startup world into the public administration. So this is like, some kind of framework. It might sound a little bit strange for now our public servants talking about this, but I think really that there's a lot of ways of thinking that are already quite common in the startup world, which can help us in the public sector to do things a little bit differently than we did previously, and to help us to adapt faster than we did in the past. And I would like to close my remarks again with some kind of personal statement. It's just because I'm a little bit like biased towards the USA, because I think it's really incredible story, incredible history of a country, and also for democracy in general. And currently in Germany, we are facing a phase of some kind of uncertainty of the relationships between Europe and US, and Germany and the US in particular. And so what I'm facing in my daily work is rising sentiment against the USA and against American technology. And I don't know, maybe it's a little bit of a German thing. What I also observed there is that people are very fast in judging what is currently going on with the new American administration. And this issue of tech sovereignty, data protection, and so on, that provides them a very good excuse to have more or less hidden anti-American sentiments. And I just wanted to make a case for the US, and that's why I'm also glad that we have representatives from the US here, that if you want democracy to succeed, you have to be pro-American per default, at least in my opinion. I think that all our countries are doing great efforts to help democracies to succeed. But I think the one thing we can agree on is that if democracy does not succeed in the US, it will fail globally. And then we will need a long time to get to this stage where we are currently. And I think that democracies, they will not just fade away overnight, but in small steps. They will be killed in small steps. And one of the steps is, I think, this like general demonization of American technology. I think that, of course, we are allowed to discuss it, we are allowed to raise our concerns and everything, but I think that we're gone a little bit too far in judging, and that we are not enough trying to understand what they are doing, and that by that we are shooting in our own legs, because I don't know what's in your experience, but in my experience, American technology is by far the most advanced in many fields, which does not mean that we should not try to do also solutions from our end, but my plaidoyer is just not demonize American technology, and just keep open-minded, stay in discussions, try to stay in touch with your American colleagues. And in each time you're here at a discussion at your place, some anti-American sentiment, which is not too rooted in some technical arguments, but just in some political judgments, try to be the counterpart who asks maybe a little bit contrarian question, whether we really tried to understand what they are doing, because otherwise I think we will lose important technological tools provided from the US, which we all will need in all the endeavors we're doing, and all the efforts to enhance our parliaments technologically. You see it only by my references. I mentioned Anthropic, I mentioned Palantir. I think it's not a coincidence that all these companies come from the US. So those are my closing remarks. I'm happy to answer your questions, also during the lunch break. And sorry once again because of my presentation, but I'm sure they will be provided after the conference to you. Thank you very much.